Hi, Will. So here we are having a conversation. Do you want to say what we're going to talk about today? It's
Well,
obviously going to be around safeguarding in neurodiversity, but
yeah, and I think it's a little bit around a conversation that we've been having around just understanding. I think the kind of interplay between safeguarding and neurodiversity. So it's uh, from what we've said, that's the
mhm,
plan. Is starting to
yeah,
open that up, and I guess this is what the first of a series of little conversations that we plan to
yeah.
have and exploring some of this stuff, which is fantastic for me and great to see you out here doing it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So we were thinking initially about just what safeguarding is, wasn't it? So shall I kick off
Right.
by
So
just giving
yeah,
context?
I think that the first question that I had when we were talking about it is what explain to me the what safeguarding means in the context of an organization and why it's important because we've been looking at just broader ideas of what safeguarding is.
I'm going to do what we're probably not supposed to do and start with the things that it's not.
Okay.
Um, because I think when people come to safeguarding, there's an assumption about it being um, protecting the health and well-being, human rights of particularly children or young people or vulnerable adults. It's
Right.
about preventing abuse and harm and neglect. And then we seem to stop there and sort of think, well, it's schools, it's youth organisations, maybe it's old people's homes, maybe it's children's homes, maybe it's, I don't know, hospitals, all of those different things.
Right.
And we don't see it in terms of business or organizations in that sort of context. And actually, we need to think about safeguarding in the context of businesses and wider organizations because it's a systemic issue in that it's not just necessarily about preventing abuse, but it's about power imbalances, it's about how an organization treats the people that work there, it's about how people are managed, it's about the culture of a team or the culture of an organization, what the expectations are, how much pressure people are put under, can they stand up for themselves without losing a promotion? Are they going to be made to work ridiculous hours under fear of how they're going to be treated? Like it's a massive, massive thing that goes beyond preventing abuse in the traditional way that we see it.
Brilliant. So there's that idea of there being the front line stuff that, as you say, we might if we're aware of safeguarding, that's where we see it being played out. I've got a background of youth work, so every year we would go through safeguarding training. How do we look after the well-being of the young people? Keep an eye out for dangers of things that might be happening to them in their family or in their communities, where we keep safeguard their well-being. Right. What it sounds like you're talking about is more around where there's power imbalances and
Yes,
where people have power and responsibility over other people and they use and abuse those powers. And we see loads of kind of situations in the news where that might be at play, be it within, more recently in the BBC, we've seen some stuff come
yeah,
out recently. And that's what we're talking about. And even more so from what you're saying, not the people out in the community, but even within just internally within the organization.
exactly that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we need to have our eyes open to it because there can be assumptions about some organizations being safe just because of the reputation they have, perhaps
Okay.
because of the kind of work they do. And also, it's just that misunderstanding of what actually safeguarding is. Like I say, the traditional thing is around children, young people. It's about preventing domestic violence, which is, I'm not saying any of this isn't important,
Yeah.
but we have that really traditional view.
And so the work that you're now doing is kind of like working alongside those organizations to open their eyes to the responsibility that they have to the in you said systemic, like the internal systems that they have to ensure that they are safeguarding, staff from the bottom to the top, that everyone feels secure and able to exist within there without fear of, harm or disruption to their lives, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think we see that in terms of some of the attitude towards what, they call it whistleblowing.
Hmm.
And there's negative connotations about reporting something that isn't right within a lot of organizations. So whistleblowing is seen as a bad thing somehow. Oh, you're a whistleblower. Um, And actually, what all you're doing is saying this isn't the right way that things should happen. We should
Okay.
be treated better.
So then my question is, because we're bringing kind of neurodiversity into the conversation around safeguarding, how does
Yeah.
it fit in this broader conversation? What's the, I guess, the word interplay between neurodiversity and safeguarding? How does it all fit together, and what is it that we need to be looking at?
The thing is, obviously, that neurodiversity, neurodivergent conditions, and so on have become like a much bigger topic of conversation now. People are being more open about their neurodivergent conditions. And so there's a lot of learning that's going on, which is really, really good. Um, but in my experience working in schools and with children, young people, and all the other things I've done previously to the work that I now do, is that there is always a sense when you're doing safeguarding training for people who are working with children or vulnerable adults, there's always this like, this is safeguarding, and these are the extra considerations we need to look out for if a child has special educational needs
Mm-hmm.
or they have some kind of disability or neurodivergent condition, all of the things that makes them
Yep.
more vulnerable.
Yep.
And what's happening now is that we're recognizing that we don't grow out of neurodivergent conditions.
Yeah.
And so the vulnerabilities are still there. They might be slightly different. For some people, they might be very strong vulnerabilities throughout their life. For other people, they might just grow past some of those vulnerabilities a bit slower than other people.
Sure.
Or to put it another way, those of us who are neurodivergent can be a bit more childlike, perhaps a little bit more innocent in how we approach things. And so understanding the vulnerabilities of neurodivergent people play into safeguarding because we are more vulnerable. And that can be really difficult to own. I've had to own that about myself and be aware of how I trust people or believe people or hear things in a very black and white way. There's lots of different ways, or perhaps I get more emotionally attached, or, all of those different things. And so actually safeguarding is really, really important around people who are neurodivergent.
So there's I mean, I worked in schools for kind of over a decade as a therapist, and the one thing that I always noticed is that there was a cliff that young people used to fall off in terms of the structure of support that existed around them within school. Even transitioning from primary school to secondary school, there was the primary school support structure, everything in place, go to secondary school, and quite often there was the secondary schools would go, well, we're going to see if they can stand on their own 2 feet for a bit, and we're here if they need it. Moving out of secondary school, like, everything is either harder to access, and they have to do it themselves, and they have to try and find the help themselves. So, when you're looking at, kind of like mental health support in for young adults, it's like years waiting list now, that it's so difficult. So that's even when they know how to do it and know where to access it. And then so these are then young people that are going out to work. These are young people heading into the workplace, whatever that looks like for them, at whatever level that looks like for them. And so the safeguarding that's needed, what I'm hearing is that there needs to be additional consideration for those people that may have a neurodiversity, that they are cared for more specifically as a vulnerable person.
Yeah. And I think that it is about that end with people coming, young people coming out of school and going into the workplace, but also right the way through, because you never grow out of your neurodivergent condition.
Mm-hmm.
And because neurodiversity is being understood a lot more, we're starting to recognize that right the way through whatever age group, people have got vulnerabilities. And I think that they show up perhaps in what seems like more neurotypical ways, or perhaps in ways that we think just align with abuse. So I know it's not in the workplace, but say someone falling into an abusive relationship and all of those kinds of things. But quite often, or certainly I've seen that once someone discovers they're neurodivergent, they then perhaps go back and unpick their lives and realize that what made them vulnerable to that abusive relationship or that abusive workplace was actually tied in with their neurodivergence as well. So actually, almost kind of in hindsight, we're starting to see a little bit more of what lies beneath someone being vulnerable.
Yeah, and there must be a broader understanding of what vulnerability means, in that as opposed to just kind of very physically vulnerable. There's an emotional and a mental health aspect to these, and
Yeah.
of those vulnerabilities, and therefore the need for safeguarding. And I was, as you were talking about that, I was kind of thinking about the kind of like the mental health and neurodiversity, and just wondering if you can give examples of how those two things, the mental health and neurodiversity, can improve safeguarding practices.
So I think firstly to say around mental health and neurodivergent conditions, people are
Yep.
neurodivergent, I think that we've come to recognize, now let me say that again, there is an assumption about what certain neurodivergent conditions look like, but actually what we see quite often is sort of behaviors of distress or trauma responses to the world not really being suitable for someone who's neurodivergent. So what we might say list as showing us that someone's neurodivergent is actually their mental health struggles as a result of trying to squeeze themselves into the expectations of a neurotypical world. The mental health piece is kind of a result of things rather than the actual symptoms of or the expression of being neurodivergent.
Okay.
So that's kind of almost like a co-occurring thing, is that because of being neurodivergent and the world we're in, we then end up with the mental health problems, the stress, depression, etc., etc. They are not expressions of neurodiversity. They are expressions of neurodivergent people struggling.
Sure. So how can an organization, because there's a lot of kind of like mental health first aid, right? That happens within organizations. That feels like very much something that has embedded itself into the psyche of HR departments and training departments of organizations. How can the addition of understanding neurodiversity help with the understanding of mental health within people that are within the organization, but also improve how people see safeguarding?
Okay, so I think that there's a few things there. So first of
Sure.
all, the bigger understanding of mental health has impacted how safeguarding is dealt with, right? So there's a more trauma-informed approach, for example.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more of the kind of gentle listening of understanding that somebody who maybe discloses abuse and they come across very angry, they're not angry at the person that they're disclosing to, they're expressing the mental health kind of anger or hurt or whatever. So I think we deal with that differently now as a result of mental health being more clearly understood. So I think it's impacted safeguarding. I think it's impacted understanding how some victims are so traumatized that in the past we might have seen them kind of changing their story a little bit as them lying, but actually a trauma response is to only remember bits at a time, and kind of it's a bit muddled and then it all kind of falls into place. So there's a lot more understanding about how to deal with victims of abuse and, in general. Throw in understanding how mental health ties in with neurodivergent conditions and understanding the vulnerabilities that some neurodivergent people have, kind of becomes like a real triple kind of whammy that will actually, working together, will actually improve all three. So what I'm seeing happen now is that safeguarding sort of was really, really not a big thing when I was young.
Yeah.
And then that's really become, that became really major.
Yeah.
Then we had the whole kind of mental health came in and became the big talking point and it's kind of embedded. Now with the neurodiversity conversation is coming in and that's becoming more embedded. But we need to be careful that we don't see them as three separate things because they really work together.
I kind of think this is maybe a last question to kind of, if I guess if people are listening to this, watching this, or picking up on clips or whatever. But my thought is, if you are not doing frontline work, or even if you are, but you've got a significant amount of backroom staff, or there's a lot that happens hidden away from kind of like front eye view, what's the benefit to an organization that they get this right?
I think if you want to just go down kind of the financial and kind of achievement route, the safer the culture,
Yep.
the better outcomes you're going to get from your employees and from your teams, because the safer you feel, the easier it is to put the energy into the work rather than into your own safety. So that's the first thing. Employee loyalty, teams working together well and being enthusiastic about the work rather than doing it out of fear. I think also in terms of, again, on the financial side, just even recruitment, now people who are coming through, sort of younger people coming through from schools or sort of first, second jobs are much more aware of neurodiversity, mental health, like the languages, totally there in a way that isn't for our generation. They're not going to want to go to companies that don't have a good reputation for good mental health, good safeguarding, good neurodiversity practice in terms of reasonable adjustments and all of those things. So there's going to be a loss. There is a financial loss as well that is pretty well documented. It's something like for every pound that's spent on well-being, a company makes £5 something in terms of their sort of, so if you want to talk really financial, that is absolutely key. Having a good system, having a good culture just means that people can work better. Just means they can be more healthy. You're not going to be dealing with people off sick. You're not going to be dealing with people silent leaving, quiet leaving, where they sort of come off sick and whatever, and then kind of gradually just go, or people resigning, having to do more recruitment. There's just a whole realm of things within a system that if that's all there, you've got a happier, sounds a bit trite, but you've got a happier work culture. You've just got a much better place to work.
And I think
and for the individual, their life is just better. You want to pass that on. You want to pass that on. Sorry. Less time off sick, less people ending up on benefits, less strain on mental health services if, say, neurodiversity is understood, so that we don't get to a mental health crisis with someone who's neurodivergent. I mean, the list could go on.
Less onboarding new staff, training new staff, integrating new staff. I mean, fundamentally, the question is what type of business do you want to run?
Exactly.
Like, what does that look like in terms of legacy that you leave behind? If you have the ability to set agenda and policy, how do you want to set that? How do you want to do that? Because sometimes the fear can be, if we focus on people, we ignore profits, but actually profits are made by the people. So no, that's brilliant. Well, I think that's probably a good place to kind of end today.
So, we can expand on all of these in future chats,
conversations. Exactly.
Conversations.
Brilliant. Well, until next time, Gabriella. Good chatting.
Thanks, Will.